Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisin, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And I have two gentlemen joining me from the other side of the world. So if you just fly a long way from San Diego, California, probably about 5,000 miles, you're gonna reach Phil Clothier, and he is joining us from England, and from Göteborg, Sweden, is Tor Eneroth, and the lower left-hand corner there, and me, your host of this show, Greg Voisin from San Diego. Isn't technology wonderful, you guys? Look, we can sit here and have this discussion.
It's fantastic. We don't have to fly so much, so we can do it here.
And we're going to be talking about a new book they have out that we'll talk about their website as well, where you can actually access this book 100% free. And for all my business listeners, it's really important that you listen to what they have to say. It's called, oh, there he has a copy. I don't have a copy. So Growing a Culture for Sustainability, you can get the book off of Amazon, but also you can go to the website and they have a download of the book for free with a page turning ability. So that's one of the resources. These gentlemen are very giving of their time and also of their resources, and it's a big resources. So I'm going to start with Phil. Phil Clothier lives in Leicestershire, England, with his wife, and they have two grown children. Phil's early career in the IT sector and as a sales director focused on happiness of his team and clients rather than income and profit. In 2000, he read a copy of Liberating the Corporate Soul. It's about when I read it too, or maybe a little before, from Richard Barrett. And I took a training in it, and that's how I got to know Phil. He had a life-changing moment, quickly moving into the fields of value, culture, consciousness, and leadership development. He went on to lead Barrett Values Center for 10 years, growing the network and global impact of his work. This included with corporations, NGOs, and governments. Tor Eneroth, he lives in Göteborg, Sweden, as we said, with his wife, and also has two children. How amazing is that? You guys just know how to produce two children. That's it. No more. Myself as well. So it's like it's two. That must have been the dictation that came down from the government. Only two. Tor's been working practically with cultural transformation for the last 25 years in roles as culture manage in large global organizations like SCA and Volvo. In these roles, he trained and coached and consulted leaders to free their own full human potential in order to liberate their organization's full potential. He's initiated and co-authored a number of publications about change and cultural transformation. His background and experience led to a director role with Barrett Values Center for more than 10 years, supporting leaders and consultants in all parts of the world and types of organizations to evolve their cultures. In 2021, Phil and Tor left BVC and established Amcara. Am I pronouncing that right, gentlemen? Amcara?
Yeah.
From the Gothic word Amcara, meaning soul friends. They've taken their experience in the field of organizational transformation, applying that to big challenges and opportunities for sustainability and well-being in all life. Well, gentlemen, pleasure having you on the show.
Pleasure being here.
You both have, wonderful bios, and you've really done the work. Let's face it, it's a big challenge out there today, and we're constantly faced with it. But I think for people, when you say growing a culture of sustainability, there can be a lot packed into that when you say that, right? It's like, okay, so what does that mean? So maybe we just start with you, Phil. What does it really mean to define sustainability in the context of what we call the current global challenges that we face? Because, sustainability of using renewable resources, the sustainability of having a culture where we support our people and human capital, the values which we possess. There's a lot packed into that. So maybe you can unpack it a little bit, both of you.
Yeah. Well, I would start by saying that there's a picture behind me looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and these are 17 goals defined by the United Nations, and most governments on the planet are saying these are the things that are necessary for good life conditions on planet Earth. And we simplify that. We're saying that sustainability is a stepping stone to well-being. And we go further than saying just well-being for human beings. We're saying well-being for all life. So that means giraffes and monkeys and blades of grass and slugs and snails, and every entity is unless it all works, none of it works. And some of the crisis we have today, it's necessary for us to focus on all of that. But I would start by saying, in fact, I'm going to read a quote from Rumi on the back of the book. It says, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself." And that's the central kind of message and philosophy that we have of this work. If we want to make a change at organizational, cultural level and global societal level, then actually the big work is to change what's inside of here. And for both of us, that's still an ongoing challenge.
Well, and I'll add to that. I think that quote is wonderful, because it really kind of sums up we've all got to change. And the Dalai Lama says one of the only ways, and Stephen Kotler says this too, which is surprising. Only one of the ways we're going to do it is to have more compassion with one another, right? And I think, well, compassion's a word, I have a foundation called Compassionate Communications Foundation. I work with the homeless. I work with the refugees from Ukraine. But I do believe that at the true soul level, a spiritual level, talking about a spiritual level, we need this consciousness shift where we are all more conscious of being compassionate with one another, so that we can help solve these problems. And that will be a kickoff for you, Tor. If you discuss the fundamental shift in thinking and behavior that's required to embrace a culture of sustainability, and there's a lot of cultures, right? So we're talking about an organizational culture. We can talk about the culture in a government. We can talk about the culture in education. We can talk about the culture, the culture of your family. There's a lot. Maybe you could unpack that one for us.
Well, culture is as you say, a very wide description of the way on how we do things here, so to speak. And a lot of that is an unconscious part of us, something that, and you also mentioned that, is we have to become more conscious. But we are also, I would say, doing a lot of things without being conscious about it. But the fundamental shift that is needed is more of recognizing that if it's not to become the best in the world, but to be best for the world, and knowing that we have a role to play and we're all contributing. You are never not contributing to shaping the culture that you are part of in your family, in your business or organization that you're working for. You're always shaping that, and it comes from what's inside of you. And the key thing is really to become conscious about what are those drivers, those needs, those aspirations that are governing us and our decision making in our daily life. And that's why we say you have to start there. And the way on how we describe it most simply is that we're all connected. Like the bee is connected to the flower and needs the flower in order to get the honey and to get that, and it's all connected. The same thing with we as human beings and on this earth. We are very much depending on that there is a livelihood on the world, or in the world that is working. And if it's not working, we won't have a business. It doesn't really matter if we only focus on the business. If we don't take care of the environment that we are part of, it will collapse.
I think some people listening might think that our approach here is a bit idealistic, in a sense that it's like, okay, you guys are painting we want to create these cultures that are there. And, we say people, planets, profit, and in what order. The issue now is really, where are you putting your priorities? And I think for people in leadership positions, which is going to be my next question, we need a shift in the leaders, how they possess, and in this case, the qualities, the characteristics that the leaders possess in order to foster this culture of sustainability. Because as you've both said, it starts with us. You know, the finger points back to us. And I think, and we, you know, I've had so many people on here talk about leadership, and you were at Volvo and you guys were at Barrett Values. You went into big companies, you worked with leaders on a constant basis. You could tell the leaders that were consciously aware and the ones that were consciously asleep. And when I say awaken, I think Liberating the Corporate Soul that Barrett wrote way back when was really about looking at that design chart of how am I going to elevate. Ken Wilber talked about it. Ken's been on the show several times as well. We look at lines and levels and whatever, without getting too crazy about it. Speak with us about the basic characteristics and fundamentals that a leader in an organization, Phil, you can lead with this, would need to have or shift in their mindset before they can actually tackle what we're talking is somewhat of an idealistic shift in culture.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with a fundamental that actually is shared by all world religions, that it works equally in organizations, which is treat others as you wish to be treated. And a wonderful organization called Reboot the Future have adjusted that a little bit to say treat others and the planet as you wish to be treated in order to include that extra stakeholder. So that comes back to what you were talking about in terms of compassion and kindness and caring and those sort of things. But the key job, I would say, in terms of leadership is to become aware of the fears that are holding us back. And we've worked with many leaders who are operating from a fear base of words like blame or manipulation or exploitation or bullying, and these are things that usually have come from traumatic childhoods where they've been stuck in a situation and they've had to adapt these strategies just to survive childhood, and they've never really become aware of them. And now they're in a leadership position and they're still operating with those same dysfunctional principles. And so the key, and by the way,
we call those, by the way, we call those adverse childhood experiences, or ACE, which you guys may be familiar with. I'm working with Dr. Brian Ullman and Dr. Foetti, who were the founders of that at Kaiser Permanente here in the United States. They did a 147,000 person study on, if you take the ACE questionnaires, what your propensity is to have higher levels of stress in your life, to be able to navigate life, to be able to come with a loving, compassionate, understanding mentality about life. And it's surprising. You are right. You do carry those with you, but you can transmute them, right? And I think it's about people like you going in and working with leaders to help them transmute many of those issues, right?
You can absolutely do that, but it requires willingness on the part of that person to say, "Oh, I now am aware of these behaviors. I've been helped to see that, and it's now my choice whether I do something about this or not." Tor, I think you were going to add something. You were going to.
No, I was just confirming what you were saying. So
okay,
repeating.
Okay, yeah. So it like in any field of transformation, us as coaches or whatever field of healing or transformation we're in, we can only work with organizations and leaders who are willing to do the work. And that requires time and courage and patience and tenacity to see it through, because this stuff is not easy. Letting go of those fears is not an easy job. But as we do that and gradually become lighter, we'll see that the universe responds and like stuff starts coming in our direction.
But it is
build upon that. Okay.
It is Tor a mind, body, spirit transformation, right? In other words, you can't just say, "Hey, look, I'm going to change my mind." You really are going to go through, because if it's not changed at a core level, Tor, deep within inside somebody's soul, it doesn't normally stick, right? And that usually means a spiritual transformation somewhere, however you want to define it. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about Judaism or Buddhism or any of that. I'm saying your own personal religious transformation, whatever that might be. Or I should say spiritual transformation.
Yes.
Right? Yes. I'm sorry. I said religious, but yeah. And so go ahead, Tor. I want you to add to that.
No, I was wanting to connect to this regarding courage, because we are very much trapped in a system where we believe that this has to be in this way, or this is the only way that it would work. And you have to have courage to challenge that way of thinking. And I have some very good example, and it had happened a couple of times when we been working with leadership teams and talking about it, their kind of view of the reality or how things are and so on in their organization. And I come across many times when leaders individually, when you talk to them individually, they say, well, I can't talk about this with others because then I will probably lose my job, or I will not be trusted, or this is not something that is typical for our business. So you need to have the courage to speak up. The interesting thing is when I speak to like 7 leaders out of 10 or 15 in the management team, more than half of them are saying the same thing, but they don't have the courage to talk about it. So it's really, it's much more inside of us than we actually.
Does the culture that they work in allow that freedom of expression? You know,
who is
much of that is
culture.
That's what
who is shaping the culture.
That
they are shaping the culture. That's the
right.
Interesting thing.
Right.
So here are people who actually are the key dominator who shape the culture, so saying that I can't do that. And if you say that you can't do it, you can't do it. But if you say I can do it, and I'm going to take that risk, or I'm going to reveal that view or my passion for that spirit that is speaking to me, and have the courage to challenge what is.
So how vulnerable, look, Brene Brown talks a ton about vulnerability. You're talking about key executives in an organization opening up their kimono, right? Boom, you guys can see everything. And you have many still male-dominated organizations, unfortunately. I think there should be more female-dominated organizations. But for a male to open up his kimono and let the rest of the world see who he is or who she is, especially at a very high level, to have that transparency. And that comes down to this question: why is having this clear sense of purpose, their own purpose, the purpose of the organization, the why, critical for organizations seeking to navigate sustainability into their DNA? You know what? Maybe you can use an example, Tor. What about Volvo? Volvo makes great cars. You know, they're a leader now in doing some electric vehicles, and you know what's happening there.
Volvo is a very good example. First of all, no organization is perfect.
Correct.
But some are trying hard and making a big difference. So it's not about finding the ones who have made it, so to speak, and they're all good. But if we take Volvo as an example, it's more of why are we doing what we're doing. It's not we can say we are here for making money, or we are here to have transportation solution, which is part of the mission statement for Volvo. I was in the trucks side, not in the car, but doesn't really matter. But the truck side had it. We are in the transportation solution business, so to speak. But when that purpose is being put into, I would say, a higher or bigger context, that we are here to find a solution that are sustainable and that works for the long term and for the next generation and so on. All of a sudden, in that conversation, when you talk about your purpose that is bigger than what you're doing in your factory and what you have with your clients, you see that you have a bigger role to play. And that actually is electrifying. It's actually, you feel proud inside of yourself that I am actually contributing to make this work. I think that when the 11 years I worked at Volvo, we were able to feel that vibration of we are here to really do something much bigger than just us individually, and contributing to a much more sustainable well-being on Earth. And
Well,
when the company is taking that responsibility, that's when the shift happens inside of the leaders and the employees.
okay, Phil.
Yeah, I just want to add. So actually, I was coaching someone this morning from an engineering. He was an engineer in an organization that goes on to help with crop production. And I started out by asking, "What's your purpose?" And he said, "Well, I engineer efficient solutions for the manufacturing line." And after not very long, he came to the point of saying, "I'm an engineer that contributes to feeding humanity." And I saw him sit up and feel totally different about himself in repositioning his purpose in that organization, making it more efficient on one hand, and then coming up with this idea, actually, I'm contributing to feeding humanity, and that matters in a whole different way. And so helping individuals and organizations to understand that purpose, I guarantee he will be in a different position when he shows up to work tomorrow, and how he feels about his work and the impact that he can have on humanity in this moment of what some would call crisis. That's a big thing.
Well, let's talk about that. We live in a world today, in my almost 69 years here on this planet, I've observed many different wars. I've observed tremendous unrest. I've observed leadership divisiveness like I've never seen before. I've seen social media tear apart the fabric of many different things. Okay. Now those are the sum of just a few of the underlying things, including all the environmental issues and fires and floods and global warming. And yet at the root of all of this, people go to work for a company and the shareholders want a profit. And that company has a big, what do you want to call it, out-facing, like Volvo, brand that has to be recognized. And we've seen disruptive brands, right? We've seen, the Tesla. All right, great, an electric car. But did it lead the way? If you were sitting in the position as a CEO of a company right now, speaking with two gentlemen like yourself, who just wrote a book called Growing a Culture for Sustainability, given all of the things I have to navigate, what are the top 3 things you would be speaking with them about, taking into consideration that big swath of information that I just dumped on you? Because that is something that I guarantee you they're all thinking about, but sometimes they just don't know how to navigate it. What's at the core? I mean, and what's at the core for both of you when I speak about this? What would you just say off the top of your head? I know it wasn't one of our questions, but
that's okay.
Yeah.
Life is like that.
Yeah.
No, it's actually, it would be wonderful to have a kind of silver bullet answer to that question, which there are not.
Right.
There are questions. If I'm facing myself in that situation, which has been many of those, is more of what is alive inside of that individual. What's their current starting point, and what are their dreams and aspirations that they are looking for? That's where we start our journey, because then we know what their priorities and focus and drivers are, and so it all depends on the response that we get when we talk to them regarding where they are. Like Phil was talking about now, what's your purpose? And then all of a sudden something evolved that we can't imagine, and we take it from there, so to speak. That is a very important part. So it's no coming in, here's the formula, you have to you do those.
Well, at your website, at your Amcara website, you have a values assessment, right? So what I was getting at there was, when our values shift to take into consideration growing a culture for sustainability, right? And they can change. It's not something that's stagnant. Phil, what would you tell somebody to look at who's feeling confused and or doesn't know how to navigate that, wouldn't it be around looking at your values?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have a few different offerings. So at Amcara.life, and the first page on that is our resources page. You could just click on that and go down to the assessments there. And there are assessments for me as an individual to look at my own personal sustainability, and then for leaders to be able to assess what's the sustainability of my organization as a culture. And then thirdly, what's the sustainability, what's our contribution to a sustainable world? So it's those three dimensions. Me inside, how sustainable is our culture, and what's the contribution that our organization, our culture makes to a sustainable world? It's a fantastic place to start, and they're all free. So
And that's
people,
what I was getting at. I want my listeners to understand you have put at your website so many of the resources that people need to get on track.
Yes.
You know, you can take these resources, you can contact these gentlemen, you can read their book. It's free there. You can go to Amazon and get it. But my point is that that's the way to do it.
You can't get it on Amazon.
Oh, you can't. Okay.
No.
Okay,
Well,
just
you
so
can
know.
order it from you then, right?
Yeah.
If you want it. I mean, you both were holding up copies, so I just
Yeah, we made a copy for ourselves, and for those who can't really believe that I can't read this online, then we have a few copies. But it's a free online.
Okay. So
let me just say something about the resources sharing, because we decided that all of our resources, tools, materials, books, self-assessments, everything we're giving away, we're putting free in the public domain, what's called the Creative Commons. We charge for our time when people want to work with us, but everything else that so here's to challenge some mindsets, because there's a huge mindset about intellectual property and that's ours and we have to have that. Well, we have the opposite view, that there isn't enough time to say we own that and only we can use it. We have to make our work available to everybody so that you can take it, you can use it free of charge, whether you're commercial or non-commercial purposes. Whether you attribute us as or not is fine. We don't
relabel
mind
it to your own or whatever. Yeah,
absolutely.
You have another one up there called Get Connected. So what I want to encourage my listeners, though, and that wasn't a question so that you could plug it. It's a question really because the resources that are out there are valuable. There's a lot of value in what they've put up there through Creative Commons. And I think you'll see, look, I work with authors every day. I see this intellectual property idea. There's a big shift occurring now about giving away your stuff. Okay. You guys aren't the only ones. I'm starting to see a pattern of where this is going. And it's phenomenal. It's really a good thing because we need to have more people have access to this kind of thing. Now, with that said, what strategies or practices can organizations adopt to empower the employees? Let's take it down the employee to take ownership of sustainability initiatives or sustainability within the organization, because many organizations are producing products and services. We know one of the big things, and I'll just point to it because it's a pet peeve of mine that I've really tried to work on, is the amount of plastic that's in everything. You know, everything you buy is wrapped twice or three times. And the amount of plastic that's ending up in our ocean, and it's floating around out there and killing birds and killing seals and sea lions and all kinds of things. And it's a shame because, you know, in our generation, both you two sitting there and me sitting here, this is pretty much the generation that created that. The question is, are we going to clean it up? And any company that makes a product or a service that gets wrapped, and I'm beginning to see it just a little bit now, the wrappings are all organic. They're trying to do things, but I'm using one little example here because when you go through this manufacturing process and you look at every little step of what you do, you need to look at from cradle to cradle, right? Sure. And I'm not certain too many people are doing it. What would you tell executives, and how would you engage these employees to want to voice their opinion about what our company's doing?
Shall I start? So I'm going to
Yeah,
start.
please. Yeah.
I'm going to start with measurement, actually, because when you measure and you and hear the voices of all your employees, then stuff comes to light. Because mostly people are passionate. Mostly people do want the organization to be successful. Most people have got children or nieces and nephews, and they're very aware of what's going on, and they care about plastic and all of that stuff.
All of
So
it.
it's not like the bosses know the answers and you ignore the employees and you just tell them what to do. Well, that's for some organizations, they still are in that industrial age command and control way of being. But frankly, that way is dying necessarily. That needs to die. We need to get everybody on board and engage their passions and their kind of, yes, we've got to make a difference here. So one, it would be measure. The second is dialogue. And we have to be in dialogue with our people to really find out what's going on. Can I give a real example?
I love real examples.
Working with an organization with over 150,000 employees in over 150 countries. And what they heard back from their employees that the predominant way of operating was really about prosperity. We're doing a lot of stuff around creating prosperity, which the world needs. Nothing wrong with that, but there were some unhealthy aspects to that. But what it turned out, this organization had their website was fantastic. It talked about their ambitions for sustainability, for net zero, for circular economy. Circular economy means getting rid of those plastic loops that you're talking about and doing that really well. They had an incredible story for what they were doing. And yet when we looked at their culture, they were unaware of the fact that their culture still had some of those deep challenges within it. And let me give you some words, because one of their executives, talking about courage, there was a moment when one of their executives said, looking at this area of peace in how they operate, hierarchy, empire building, manipulation, blame, and power were the features of their culture categorized under this area of peace. And she said, if we're operating with those sort of factors internally, we can never be a force for good in the world. And we as an executive team have to address these things and transform ourselves so that we can then run the organization in a way that respects our people so that they can then make the difference at the scale that we want it to be. And so listening to their people, who for some of them were still burning out, and there were deep problems within that situation, I don't doubt that they had their aspirations and intentions and goals around sustainability were absolutely true. They held integrity around those things. What they were unaware of was the internal culture that was holding them back, that was going to make it difficult / impossible to achieve those sustainability goals and run a profitable business.
And in order to do that, you have to invite the whole organization in a co-creative dialogue about what that is. What does it mean? Because the ownership is rising, or the commitment and motivation to do something about it is when you feel that you are part of it. It's not somebody else who's going to fix it. I am actually being invited to contribute to make this happen. And the keys to start that is what Phil is talking about, recognizing we need to do things differently here and address these issues that are actually holding us back.
It was a good example, Phil, and I appreciate that, because it was a very, very big company, 150,000, 150 countries. So a big swath. One of the things that I was recently watching a documentary on working, and it had Barack Obama speaking with all these working class people. And in this case, it was just in America, but this is really worldwide. It's an issue. When you look at the division between what a top executive makes today and what the lowest paid person makes today, and that gap, that huge gap, talk about a culture that creates animosity, that creates challenges for people to even have a sustainable culture, right? Would either one of you like to field the question about this huge gap in society today, which we've seen grow to 230 times at the highest level, the lowest person working inside of a company. And I think when you don't have some equanimity, or you don't change that structure of pay, or you work like Patagonia does, where you're sharing all of those profits. And I do understand that I'm using an example of a company which is just way out of the box in comparison to most companies. Well, what would you two gentlemen say about that? And how does that affect a culture of sustainability?
That's a good one. First of all, I think that even if Patagonia is way out of the box, is also an inspiration and a good example of it is possible to start to think differently. And leading the way. And I'm sure that many of the listeners have been reading, was it I'm gone surfing. I don't know what the exact title is.
Yeah.
So that's one way of how you, as an organization, could make a difference by sharing how you look upon doing business. But I can only agree with you. If we are going to have more of a sustainable world, we have to address the issues. How that is going to be addressed, it again starts with the leaders recognizing that this can't continue, and we have to make a change. Somebody is setting those salaries and make those differences. Why do I have to have so much more money as a CEO or a president of the organization? Or why do we don't pay more fairly? So on. So I may make it very simple, but it's really more of a decision. Becoming conscious and then making a decision that this has to change.
We had a
go ahead,
we had a real example here in the UK in the last few months. You might know that we had a very short-term Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who lasted, I think, something like 40 days, the shortest Prime Minister ever, because of the disastrous decisions she made. And one of those disastrous decisions was to unfreeze the gap, the cap on bankers' pay. So there had been a cap put on bankers' bonuses in order to address some of these equality measures in society. And she said, no, we have to let the markets make these decisions, and we're going to completely unfreeze that, and bankers can be paid unlimited amounts of money. And basically government and the people of the UK said, no, that is not fair. That is not equitable, and we're not going to have it. And that was amongst some other disastrous decisions she made at that point, which was basically to enable capitalism to go crazy. Basically, the UK said, no, that shall not be the way, and equity matters. And so I actually do see that slowly this is coming into society. And frankly, equality is one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and that happens. Equality in terms of poverty, and equality in terms of food and education, and
gender,
all those different things. And until all of that is addressed, it's impossible to address any of them individually. So they all have to be done at the same time. And yes, there are lots of bad examples, but I'm really happy to say that it was. We make some disastrous decisions here in the UK, like Brexit. But anyway, that one around rejecting the unbridled greed of bankers was, I think, a good decision.
I think so too. And I think that to get to sustainable wages where people can educate their children and buy a home and have the things that they want in the world, meaning, there is, it was Bucky Fuller who said this, and I actually wrote a chapter in a book about Buckminster Fuller. He said, if we'd spend less on weaponry and more on livingry, there's more than enough to go around. And I think that is the point. Some people may think Bucky Fuller was a little crazy, and maybe he was, but the reality is some of his postulates, some of his theories were right on. I mean, this goes back years and years and I've been a studier of his for years. And that leads me to our wrap-up question here for our interview for both of you. What are some of the essential metrics and indicators organizations should consider when measuring sustainable performance inside their organization? What would you two gentlemen, you have tons of resources at your website. We're going to direct everybody to go to amcara.life, download the book, download the assessments. But, if somebody out there is listening today and they're saying, well, guys, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what to measure. What advice would you give a CEO or a CFO or somebody in HR department today who's listening to this and is going, wow, I need some place to go? And I'm going to say first, go to amcara.life and get the resources there and read the book. And then secondly, when you have a question, contact one of these gentlemen through the website. So what would you measure?
Well, I'm going to start with some of the traditional measures that we have. So they're still useful. So measuring profitability and measuring productivity and measuring customer satisfaction and employee well-being and those sort of things. These are all critical measures we need to start with. But what we've created is a way to measure culture directly connected to the UN sustainability goals. So we look at these 5 areas, and now I'm being put on the spot, and I'm going to have to remember what they are.
No, you remember them for sure.
People, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnership. So we can look at the cultural dimensions of an organization through these 5 dimensions. Well, to what degree are we considering people internally and externally in our decision making? To what extent are we considering prosperity for society? And prosperity, but by the way, include things like that fairness of wages, because that matters. Planet, I think, speaks for itself. What are we doing to ensure that we are taking our part for not just doing less harm to the planet, but actually doing positive good? What are we doing in order to ensure that peace prevails in my heart, in our culture, and on Earth? And finally, we look at this area called partnership, which it says, we can't do this alone. It requires all of us. It requires all of us to work together. And as competitive as we might feel with each other, actually, if we work together with some of these other organizations, we're going to get there a whole lot quicker, and we'll create a future for our children's children and well-being for all.
And maybe we should say that those 5 Ps is an extension of the triple bottom line, which was the
it used to be 3 Ps. Yeah,
exactly. And then United Nations realized that it can't work unless we have partnership and peace. And if we look at the world right now, who are in many senses, specifically here in Europe, we are very much caught up and focusing on the war, which is a short-term focus. It's not helping us to become sustainable. We are now focusing more on our basic need of survival and making sure that it works. But so it's holding us, that unpeace is actually holding us back from creating a more sustainable world. So
Well, no, those 5 Ps, and again, for my listeners, go to the website and get this book. I mean, they say you can't get it in physical form, so just trust me. Go download the book. You can flip through the pages. There's a lot of pictures. It's an easy read. It's not difficult. And when you get done, you're going to be able to look at the things that you want to measure and create initiatives in your organization. And these gentlemen would be happy to help you create those initiatives in your organization and then start to measure them for the outcomes that you're attempting to achieve. And this is, I will say, gentlemen, it's a slower process, but you need to be patient in this process. I think a lot of times people say, oh, I'm going to take this on and we're going to accomplish this by this date. And it's an old Buddhist saying, and I know both these gentlemen know it, but expectation is suffering in the making. So don't suffer because you didn't actually reach the milestone you thought you were going to make, Because here's the complexity of this, and both these gentlemen have spoken about it. You're talking about the complexity of a person. We're human beings. We have feelings. They matter. Those feelings and behaviors sometimes get in the way of us doing exactly. We addressed that earlier, what we were talking about. You then have all this production facility at Volvo makes, you got to put these parts together and get these things. And then you got all these resources that you got to pull them from and investigate who's giving you what, and are they telling you the truth? And what kind of assessment are you doing to figure out, is this where you want to get your plastic from that goes in the car, right? All of those kind of things become something for you to look deeper. But here's the thing. For us to change, you're going to need to take a microscope and look very closely at all these elements. And then you're going to need to expand that to see the world in which you're operating. And when you do that expansion, you actually see the impact you're having to global warming, the impact you're having to whether it's a division in salaries, the impact you're having. And you can make it a much happier place to be, both your own culture and your personal world, if you open up and let go, right?
Yep.
You have to let go of a lot of memes. We were talking about this earlier. If it's an adverse childhood experience, you need to learn how to let go of that might be affecting a behavior or a thought. And that's where it all starts. That's why this show is called Inside Personal Growth, because the guru's in the mirror. When you make up in the morning, and you look in the mirror, this is where it starts, is right here. And you guys have been a great two guests to have on the show. I appreciate your time. Again, the book is called Growing a Culture of Sustainability. Phil Clothier and Tor Eneroth. Go down and download that book, because as Tor told us, you can't get a physical copy. They're the only two that have physical copies. So thank you guys both for being on Inside Personal Growth. Any last words?
Thank you for having us.
Actually, I started with a quote from Rumi. I'm going to finish with the last 3 lines of a poem from Gary Schneider, which is guidance for this work. And he says, "Stay together, learn the flowers, go light."
Did you say learn the flowers?
Yes, like learn about nature.
Learn the flowers. Okay.
Stay together, learn the flowers, go light. It's a poem that we use at the end of the book to really express. The poem is called For the Children by Gary Schneider, and it's short, but it's beautiful. And
it is. That's, what, people today have so much coming at them. A 3-liner like that is something they can remember. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that one. Thank you both for being on Inside Personal Growth. Namaste to you both.
Thank you. Namaste.
Appreciate you.
Thanks, Greg. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Greg.